The world of marketing and PR has turned into quite the frenzy, and it's not easy to navigate the ever-changing landscape. Join me in my journey to learn from the best, as some of the world's top marketing and PR professionals share their stories on ways you can harness these changes to grow your brand. It's time to fuel the frenzy. Welcome to our Fuel the Frenzy podcast and our video podcast, our Facebook Live podcast too. So it's great to be here today, and I'm really, I know this next topic is going to touch the hearts of many marketers who are responsible for storytelling, as we all are. But welcome to Melanie Deziel today. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
It's very good to have you. You have a phenomenal resume. I mean, I interview a lot of people, Melanie, and your resume really kind of struck a chord because of, the amount of some great publications that you have worked with. But I would love you to do a little bit of an introduction to yourself and kind of allow people to hear your story a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I work I'm a branded content consultant, and my primary mission is to help brands and publishers tell better brand stories. And most of that I do through my background in journalism. So I started out, I was educated on the journalism side of things. So my undergraduate degree is in investigative reporting, journalism with a focus in investigative reporting, and my master's is a focus in arts criticism. So I really walked that line between the art and the science of reporting and spent a lot of time thinking about what makes really compelling content. And obviously I found that, those are probably the two least employable versions of one of the least employable degrees. So I had to find a way to put those skills to use in a new context.
Right.
And that's how I found myself on the brand content side of things, is realizing that many of the things I learned in journalism are so applicable and so helpful in a marketing context. Understanding how to find stories, how to justify those stories with other sources, how to really think about what it is you can do in service of your readers to provide them value. And so that's kind of been my journey. I started out at the Huffington Post, where I helped build HuffPost Partner Studio. I went over to the New York Times, where we built T Brand Studio, which still does some of the most incredible brand content work. And then most recently was at Time Inc., where I helped lay the groundwork for the Foundry, which is their brand content team that serves all 35 of their U.S. magazines. So a lot of different audiences, different voices, and different content focuses. So it's been an adventure.
Sounds like it's been a great adventure for you. So how do you, maybe just delve a little bit deeper for me on that. You bring the journalistic background into branded storytelling. And how do you think that allows you to, help these brands to do a much better job with their content? Because I think that's an interesting piece, which is probably missing from a lot of people's experience, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah, I think as marketers, there's always this perception that creating content is very difficult and it's hard to create good content and we don't know what stories to tell. But if you think about it, it's only difficult for us as marketers because we don't do it every day. If you look at a journalist or a magazine, a website, their whole thing is content, right? They pump out content all day. And granted, not all of it is the best, right? Of course, there's, with quantity comes some compromises, but it just goes to show that it's not difficult in and of itself. It's only difficult when you're not familiar with it. Yes. So what I'm able to take from the journalism side of things is just very little things, things like learning where to look for stories or what kinds of questions to ask when you're in an interview environment with one of your customers or your vendors or someone who's giving a testimonial, for example, to really draw out more of an emotional connection instead of just those surface level questions like, why do you love our product?
Yes.
And why do you think we're so great? How to kind of go a little bit deeper. Those basic things about interviewing and story searching, those really come naturally to you when you come from the journalism world. So I try to just share some of that with my marketing colleagues so that they feel a little more comfortable with going out and being brand journalists, for their own team, their own company, or the partners that they may work with.
That's really interesting. So, so the journalistic background of where you've been able to kind of dive deeper and maybe even kind of scrutinize what you're hearing and question it allows you to kind of, uncover something perhaps even more emotive in there.
Exactly. Yeah. A big part of it, I think, is like trust with your readers and truth. It's so hard, especially in today's environment where you've got concerns about fake news and, propaganda and things like that. It becomes all the more important that you've clearly vetted the content that you're putting out, that it is true and comes from a reputable source, and it's something worth reading, that you're differentiating yourself. You're not just putting out another gift guide for the holidays, but you've thought about something of value, something differentiated that can be trusted.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it comes down to that, like you were saying, is delving a little deeper, questioning things, wondering where else can I find information that's reliable? Who does my audience trust on this topic? How can I bring that perspective in?
Yeah.
So much of it is just trying to make sure that you're not the only voice, that it's your brand saying something because I said so, but that you found other experts, or, whether it's a study or an individual who has, experience, who can really speak to that topic and help bring it to life in a way that can be trusted by your audience.
So that's that authentic content, isn't it? Because it's, and it's, I'm sure you see this, I know we see it a lot, is so much repurposed content where, it's very easy for someone to say that this is their point of view when they've gone and researched it and got everybody else's point of view and then pulled it into theirs. What you're suggesting to make content even more compelling is about kind of digging deeper and actually, and if actually asking customers, questions to make it authentic, or the research. And I agree with all that. That's so critical.
And it doesn't even have to be your customers, but I always say that, as a brand, you impact so many people and you have relationships with so many people, right? You have vendors, you have clients, you have customers, you maybe have employees who are working in various different places. All of those people have a story to tell that's close to your brand.
Yeah.
A good example is if I'm looking for a hotel for a visit, in an upcoming trip that I'm taking, I can read 10 things to do courtesy of, one hotel, or I could read the story of a bellhop who's worked at this other hotel for 30 years and he knows the best restaurants and the little hidden gems that you have to go find. And, this great historical building that you should take a photo of while you're here, and that personal human element by going a bit deeper and getting someone's story. It's not just here's some things to do. It's making me feel connected.
Yeah. And that's what people want. People want to read things where they believe in it and they feel that connection point. That's so interesting. So do you advise clients? I mean, you mentioned a hotel example. Has that been one of your clients where you've worked with hotel brands?
So the hotel specifically is not my client.
Okay.
So because I worked on the publishing side of things for several years, a lot of what I was doing was getting RFPs from brands who were saying, we want to create content. Here's our goal. What should we do?
Yeah.
So my job became coming up with content ideas that fit the context of all the different publications where I worked, the different audiences. Is it print versus online, magazine versus newspaper? Which section are we going to run it in? So it sort of created this overactive content imagination where I'm sort of conditioned to come up with the ideas like that. But most of what I'm doing now is actually working with those brands or publishers who want to set up a content practice. They don't want to just do a one-off article, but they want to sort of adopt the mindset of a brand journalist. They want to create their own newsroom or their own content SWAT team, if you will. They want to set up, really change their practices to bring storytelling into their core. And so if they need someone who can help them do that, adopt the mindset of an editorial newsroom, then I can come in and help them get that set up and running.
Right. So is that like a branded newsroom? Is that what you mean? Where I'm starting to see that with more and more brands where they're creating their own newsroom. They're not relying on trying to sell it in through media relations. They're allowing people to come to them. And not just the media, influencers in general. Is that the type of thing that you offer to these? So when I'm working with a publishing client, they're hoping to set up a branded content studio. Most folks call it a content studio, that can be there of service to any brands that want to run native ad content within their publication. So I do quite a bit of that because that's really my background. But like we were saying, those core concepts of setting up a storytelling team, whether you're in a publishing environment or you're inside of a brand, if you have the right mindset, then a lot of it's the same. So I have helped a couple brands who have said they want to set up either a brand newsroom or a storytelling unit or a brand journalism team. It goes by many names, but if they're looking
bring in dedicated creator talent to help create content that lives on their properties and off their properties, then, that's something that generally I can help them get everything lined up so that they're ready to take off running and start creating more brand content.
That's great. So tell me, just to put this in context, why do you think there has been this shift why is there this need to help these publishing companies kind of change their strategy? So what do you think that is?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting time to be in publishing, to be in just for clarity, publishing in the news sense, right? Magazines, newspapers, websites, not necessarily the book sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, the news media, it's been an interesting time the last, 5 to 10 years. We've dealt with a lot of different things. I mean, the shift to online from print revenue was challenging for a lot of publishers. Many, local newspapers folded. Many of us live in communities that lost our local paper. But, the rise of ad blocking has made it even more difficult for us to monetize our online presence. And then you add the third layer where now that anyone can be a publisher, it's harder and harder to differentiate yourself and create something people will pay for in a subscription model. So all of those things combined has meant that a lot of publishers are really hurting for revenue. And their challenge is, how do we monetize the audience we have, the different voice that we have, and perhaps the talent that we have in a new way? And there's a lot of solutions for that. Some have leaned really heavily into e-commerce and they're selling products. They're using affiliate links. They're launching standalone events. We've seen Refinery 29 doing R29 rooms, which is an interesting, sort of artistic experience. But, the Times has Times Talks. There's so many event options popping up. Yeah. But many of them have found that they can monetize their audience and their expertise in storytelling by setting up these dedicated units, so that when a brand comes and says, I want to reach your audience, we get to say as publishers, and we can help you do that. It's not just about filling in a little banner box on the side of our articles, but really producing something of value, of our publisher quality, to create a more authentic connection with the audience. So it's sort of a service to our readers as well, because ideally what we're creating with branded content is something that's, more valuable for them than a pop-up ad that's much easier to sell and much easier to put up. We want to provide something that's more valuable. So that's sort of why I think it's risen in the last few years, especially. Yeah,
the landscape has, it's shifted so much, and there've been so many challenges for them to deal with. It sounds like, that they need this new thinking, and it's out of the box thinking to some extent. So give me an example then, can you, of some type of branded content that you would offer? Like, I'm trying to visualize what that might be.
Sure, yeah. So the most, I would say, famous example that I've worked on, or maybe one of our most well-known case studies, is at the time when I was the first editor of branded content at the New York Times. This storytelling unit, T-Brand Studio, we had just set up separate from the newsroom. Our goal was to tell brand stories. And Netflix came to us and they said, we are launching season 2 of Orange is the New Black, which is their show about women in prison. And so our task, like I said, we were the idea people, was to come up with what is the overlap between the story that Orange is the New Black is going to tell, and then what our readers at the New York Times are interested in. What's that small overlap where we can tell a story that's going to work for both sides of that equation? So what we ultimately came up with was a piece that's called Women Inmates, Why the Male Model Doesn't Work. And it's a long-form investigative piece that we interviewed current and former inmates, people who work inside the prison reform workers and researchers, and basically found out what is unique about women's experience of prison. How is the women's prison system different or the same as men? Men's system, and just sort of shining a light on what that experience is like in real life, to kind of line up with many of the plot lines and things that are addressed by the show. But we were fully focused on real women and real experiences. We did that through the written piece, but we also had a 3-part mini documentary where we interviewed current and former inmates about their experiences. We had infographics. I recorded all the interviews that I did when I was reporting the piece, so that you could sort of listen to audio snippets of these women telling their stories or hear their voices. So ultimately, the piece itself was really journalistic in nature. We had trustworthy sources. We found a unique angle. It was really quality content. It was copy edited and thoroughly vetted by folks in-house there. But it was a story backed and inspired by Orange is the New Black. And ultimately the goal was to get our audience to see that, hey, you might think this show is a sitcom or, you know, that it's just kind of silly characters doing, you know, outlandish things, but it's truly based on a real story, and women go through true things like this all the time. If you're interested in social justice, you're interested in, you know, learning more about this system, then this show is a path to do that. So for us, you know, it felt like a major victory that we were able to do something that felt really authentic for the times, but also felt really authentic for Netflix too.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing project to work on. I would love to have been a part of that and ask those questions. I really would have done, because I did watch that program, and you know, and I think it must have helped Netflix because again, people are watching things because they want to believe. You know, they're trying to create a connection, and if they know that there's truth behind this, it just makes the show even more watchable. It does.
And I know people always ask, like, did it work, right? After all, it was a marketing campaign, and we weren't splicing in photos of, you know, the characters or clips from the show. But really what they were going for was more of an awareness play and appealing to an audience that might not normally watch the show. You know, they pretty much understood that they had the millennial woman audience was like, we were relating to the characters. We loved their jokes. We were already in. They were looking to attract the audience.
No, I agree with that. Very clever.
And it's so important to think about the context too, because during the same time when we ran this at the New York Times, they also ran a piece of branded content with BuzzFeed. And that piece was called 21 Reasons Prison Might Not Be So Bad After All. And it was all gifts from the show. So, you know, these funny, relatable moments of characters, you know, pointing out things that maybe weren't so bad, right? Now, that wouldn't have worked on the New York Times. And the New York Times piece wouldn't have worked on BuzzFeed. So a big part of it comes down to acknowledging where your content is going to live and figuring out the best way to bring it to life for that audience there. So, you know, it's such an important lesson for any brand. You don't have to come spend a boatload of money and do some huge giant thing with an international publisher. But if you understand your audience and your context where that content is going to live, you can create something that's really authentic for that context. And that might be so much better for you than some big splashy thing, you know, somewhere else.
So out of interest, any of the stories you uncovered, did they lend themselves to the next series? Do you know whether they actually help to shape anything? Because that would be, then they're making it even more real.
It's a good point. You know, I've watched the show. I watched it then. I've watched it since. And I'm always kind of looking for that, right? Because now I feel this special connection to the series, having heard stories of real women who have been through similar things. It certainly changed the way I watch the show because I see the kernels of truth behind things now. I don't know that the stories we talked about kind of turned into any plot lines. I don't have a window into how the series is written or, you know, necessarily if those folks even saw what we worked on. But I do know that it did definitely raise awareness about the issues that are in the prison system, specifically for women and poor women, even more specifically. And it really started a conversation. So what's crazy is that piece organically appeared on the module on the front page of the New York Times, that website that says most emailed. So this piece that day was one of the most emailed pieces of New York Times content. Even though it was sponsored by a brand, you know, we were really living up to the expectations of our readers, and that's a great compliment for us. And at the end of the year, we ultimately found out that it was among the top 2% of all NewYorkTimes.com content for that year. So, you know, the lesson for us was if we can stick to our guns, if we can make truly journalistic content that is, you know, is reputable and is unique and using quality sources, then we can have that same level of performance that some of the best editorial content does. And that gives hope, I think.
So how did that come about? Was that Netflix kind of being creative, thinking that way, or was that the New York Times approaching Netflix? How did that work?
Yeah, so most of the branded content programs that I've worked on in a publishing context are based on an RFP response. So the brand or the agency on their behalf puts out a request for proposal and says, we're looking for some kind of marketing initiative. This is our budget. This is the time we want to launch. Here's what we're trying to say.
Right.
They may not even explicitly ask for content,
right.
But it's sort of on the publisher to take that RFP, come up with some sort of program or concept or content idea, and then respond and hope that we get the business.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was the case here, where obviously they worked with a number of different partners. So, they must have responded positively to BuzzFeed's approach and probably some others as well.
Yeah.
But we were lucky to get picked as one of the partners. They liked our idea of what we said is we really just want to investigate and find out what the real experience of women in prison is like. We think that's the approach the New York Times readers would most appreciate and be most engaged with.
Yeah, and you proved that was right. Yeah.
Yeah, and they luckily they trusted us. I mean, that's the other thing that's so important here is you can have the best idea in the world as a journalist, and it's easy for us to come up with all these cool, storytelling ideas, but ultimately you're depending on that brand partner to see the value of the story you want to tell and to be willing to take that risk, to be willing to let you go in and explore that story as it unfolds, because we couldn't tell them who we were going to talk to, who would say yes. We couldn't tell them what their experience was like. We can't say we're only going to talk to women who have experienced living in this prison or only women who have done this kind of crime. Like, we really needed them to let us go free and dig in and investigate and see what we found. And that takes a tremendous amount of trust as a brand. And I can't be more grateful that Netflix and many other brands, are great at this too, are willing to trust the creators and the storytellers, and in some cases the influencers, to kind of follow the story where it goes most naturally.
You raise a really good point. And the person I had on the show earlier today talked about the same thing. They are a content producer, and they basically, said marketers need to let content creators do what they do best. And if anything, some marketers, without wanting to blame people, but they kind of, when you're trying to tick all these boxes of, does this achieve our objectives and our goal, the creativity goes, and the end result is not what you want it to be. So the fact that Netflix gave you that freedom, it's not until you dig and you start to see where the opportunities are, do you know how it's going to be, do you?
Right. Yeah. And it's so funny because I think in other parts of our lives, we kind of recognize that trusting the expert is the best way to go.
Yes.
You don't go into your X-ray technician's office and you're like, maybe you should turn the light a little bit brighter and maybe look a little over here. This looks kind of strange, right?
So true.
You trust that, your baker, your tech, your tech team, your mechanic, you're not climbing under the hood with them, telling them what to do, I think we all recognize we feel like storytellers because, we are storytelling throughout our lives, every day through email and social media. Personally, it makes us feel like we have that expertise too, but it is scary for brands. And I can totally appreciate that, that you're pouring money into something that you don't necessarily know at the outset what you're going to get. I can see why that's scary. But that's why it's so important to choose storytelling partners that you trust, that are going to produce quality stuff. That it's expensive and sometimes it's scary, but it's really important. And when you trust the process and trust the creators that you're partnering with, the results are so much better for everyone involved.
Well, you've definitely proven that. And what a great project to work on. I'm sure you've had many, but I imagine that must have been probably the epitome of a project to work on when you can ask these ladies those type of questions. So amazing. So congratulations to you for doing that. That's really, really good.
Thank you.
And that is a show which you're right. It definitely, I found myself watching it, shocked that I was watching it because it wouldn't really appeal to me. And I don't know what took me there in the first place, but very clever idea of using more authentic content to drive people to watch it. So I love it. Well, look, we're at the end of our time, and I told you earlier this was going to go so quick when we've got something, when we're passionate about the topic. You definitely are, and you got such a great story to tell. Melanie, how can people get in touch with you if they would like to reach you and ask you any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if they want to find that Netflix piece we were talking about, you can just search Netflix, New York Times, paid post. It will come up, I promise you. Again, it was called Women Inmates, so that will help you find it. If you want to reach out to me, I'm across most of the internet as Mdeziel, so Mdeziel. That's my website. It's my Twitter handle. Anywhere you head to Twitter or to my website, and you'll find all the other networks and contact information you might need. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all the soon-to-be brand storytellers who are listening.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. You have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.